How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Sector 6, and today we're going to be talking about an interview that was done late on last year, around the time of the 35th anniversary of the franchise, and it's an interview that's been done with Yoshinori Kitase, and it's talking about Final Fantasy VII. So, of course we're going to look at it, obviously. Don't forget, drop a like on the video, subscribe for future content, and, stick around, keep an eye out, because we're going to be doing stuff. But let's crack on with this interview. Now, like I say, this interview was done around the time of the 35th anniversary of Final Fantasy, so it was done sometime in mid-December, somewhere around that region. But the subject of the interview with Kitase is all about Final Fantasy VII, Remake, Rebirth, the OG, the compilation, everything. We're going to skim over most of the interview and just kind of briefly touch on things. I'll make sure a link to the full interview is in the description so that you can check it out, read over all the details yourself. So right at the start, the interviewer talks about the thought process after completing Final Fantasy VI and what ended up leading to Final Fantasy VII. And Kitase responds that they planned originally for Final Fantasy VII to be a 2D game, but it was cancelled after a couple of meetings because a lot of them then moved on to work on Chrono Trigger. And then once Chrono Trigger was completed, they came back, rebooted the Final Fantasy VII development cycle, and that was when a lot of the ideas actually came to fruition and things like that. They continue to talk about Final Fantasy VI and the transition into Final Fantasy VII and 3D and things like that. And it's moderately interesting, but it's not what we're really here to talk about. So the final two questions seem to be the two questions that are the most pertinent to Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth and beyond. So the interviewer asked, going into the compilation, you and the team had a chance to change, reveal, or retcon elements of the story if you wanted to. For instance, Rufus and Sung appear to die in FF7, but then are revealed as alive in Advent Children, and even revealing the fact that humans survived wholly at the end of Final Fantasy VII. What was it like making story decisions like this, changing story elements and revealing new information without changing the impact of the original game? And Kitase goes on to respond, we approached the Final Fantasy VII Remake project with the aim to make it something that could be enjoyed by both fans of the original game and people who did not know it. I have also had experiences where a game that I loved and had a lot of fun with in the past was remade, and I bought it and played it out of the overwhelming nostalgia. It's enjoyable for a while, but the fun from that nostalgia only really lasts through the first sections. I realised this halfway through and didn't carry on playing. I kind of disagree with that. I mean, it's personal preference. It's up, some people, I will quite happily sit and play Final Fantasy VII, the original Final Fantasy VII again. There's numerous games that I will happily sit and play frequently. So personally, I don't agree with that statement, but because of this, I decided that Final Fantasy VII Remake would not just appeal to nostalgia, but would include a new story as well to feel both nostalgic and fresh at the same time. The result of this is that for Part 2 and Part 3, we are able to give fans the excitement of wondering which parts will be 100% faithful to the original and where the new elements will be added. So, they've kind of danced around this point a fair bit over the last few years. With, it's going to be Final Fantasy VII, it's not going to change, Final Fantasy VII will still remain Final Fantasy VII, etc, 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 etc. And then a few months ago, we got that interview where they said, some places, don't worry if you don't go to some places, and I'm going to be doing a video regarding that subject soon as well, but yeah, they kind of said, don't worry, if you miss a place, you'll go there eventually. You'll get there. Don't worry about it. And that was kind of like the first real big moment where a lot of people who were adamant that things were not going to change kind of started going, oh, actually things might change a bit. And for me, it was just confirmation of what I was already thinking, that this was going to be a different game, this wasn't a remake, it was a sequel, and they'd finally started not confirming it, but alluding to the fact that things were going to be different in interviews. And now, this flat out says which parts are going to be the same and which parts aren't. Can you figure it out? That's pretty much what the last part of this response is saying. Which parts will be 100% faithful to the original. People seem to be rallying against this, but the fact that new elements are being added has to change the original story in some capacity. You cannot add new elements to this story without it having a knock-on effect and changing the story itself. You just can't really do it. It's not really possible. So as soon as we started seeing things like the survival of Zack, Sephiroth doing things differently, people surviving other than Zack that shouldn't really have survived, do you know what I mean? As soon as we started seeing things like that, that should have been the indication, like, oh hello, things are going to change. Now they're flat out saying to us, like, yeah, things are going to change, which bits do you think it is? And then finally they wrap the interview up. The interviewer asks, how has your relationship with the game changed over the years, in particular as you've returned to the universe with the compilation and remake? Has how you feel about the game changed with a retrospective eye? And Kitase responds, ever since I joined the games industry, I've always set myself the theme of creating drama through games. With the original FF7, the shift from the style of the previous 16-bit hardware to the latest 3D CG allowed for massive increases in the power to depict characters and stories, and became the origin of the dramatic storytelling style that is still used in Final Fantasy titles today. On the other hand, when I look back at that game, the original model for Cloud was only made of 400 polygons and looked a bit like a doll carved out of wood. So the older I got, the more I wanted to update him. The original FF7 has been loved by the fans for over 20 years, but I started to feel that I didn't want it to finish up as something in an archive, and wanted to make it a title that continues to be loved for 100 years to come. That's what FF7 Remake is. Which is an interesting response. It's kind of like, yeah, we're going to refresh Final Fantasy VII to a certain degree. But, like, this is the thing, I kind of disagree with that a little bit, because Remake will end up in an archive as well. Every game is, you know, destined to end up in an archive at some point. But Final Fantasy VII is one of those titles that kind of, even like as a historian of gaming, you would be compelled to play Final Fantasy VII. Anyone who takes an interest in like the history of gaming and things like that, Final Fantasy VII will always be one of those kind of like mold-breaking moments where things changed and never went back kind of thing. And it wasn't alone, there was other games around that same time, like Metal Gear Solid and like Ocarina of Time and things like that, that all kind of did the same thing. They all kind of pushed gaming forward into the next generation. So anyone who's kind of interested in things like that will always look at FF7 because it was an integral part of that shift. Whereas Remake, it isn't. As far as Final Fantasy fans go and FF7 fans go, depending on how Remake and Rebirth and Beyond goes down, yeah, fair enough, it could end up being like a game that's forever remembered by Final Fantasy fans. But Final Fantasy VII will be forever remembered by just fans of gaming in general. I'm seeing things differently to Kitase a little bit here on this last question. I do get, though, the urge to upgrade things and everything like that, and I personally did want a remake. I wanted FF7 in pretty shiny 3D graphics, and with voice acting and everything like that. And thankfully, Sunamods created EchoS, so, you know, everything's good on that front. This is a new story remake, in my opinion. Like, there's going to be so many changes by the end of it. The sum of those parts is going to amount to the new story. It won't be Final Fantasy VII. So, yeah, I don't really view this as an update to Final Fantasy VII. I view FF7 Remake as like a capstone to the Final Fantasy VII story. Like, this is going to be it. This is going to be the end of it. Once Remake Part 3, whatever it's called, Regenesis, we all know that's what it's going to be called, come on. But once Regenesis, oh god, it hurts. Once that drops, that's it. That's FF7 done. That's going to be it. That's going to be the end of it. So that's how I'm looking at Remake. It's interesting that Kitase is looking at it like that, but also saying that it's going to change, and therefore it isn't FF7, and therefore by his own logic FF7 would still be in the archive. I'm not trying to shit on what he says or anything like that, but there's just, it doesn't logically feel right to me. Maybe it's a translation thing, I don't know. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the interview. Not surprised by that previous answer, where it said which bits are going to change and which bits aren't. You know, obviously that was going to be the case. Like, I've been saying this since day one, and as we're getting closer and closer to the game, it's almost like they're doing preemptive damage control, because they've seen how certain sections of the fan base reacted to Remake. On the whole, I think people reasonably enjoyed Remake. I think on the whole, people pretty much liked it. But there was the vocal, I'm going to say minority without actually checking the numbers, but I assume it's a minority. Those people still exist. Those people will still probably pick up Rebirth. And even if they don't pick up Rebirth, they'll probably shit on it. We've seen what's been going on with Forspoken. And yes, Forspoken is not the best game in the world, but it's a good game. It's not a 2 out of 10 game. It is objectively not a 2 out of 10 game. It's ludicrous that people are giving it scores like that. And it just shows what type of reactions people will give when they don't get what they want. We saw it with Remake, and we will probably see it again with Rebirth when things change. So it kind of feels like they're doing preemptive damage control. Let me know what you think. Let me know. Am I reading too much into this? Am I looking for confirmation in what I want? Like, what's going on here? Everything just feels like it's kind of leaning towards the fact that Rebirth is going to go off the rails at some point. Yeah, everything that they're saying, man, is just making me feel like they're preparing people. They're preparing people. And you all know the people that will lose the shit if certain things change. Everybody knows this. It's going to be interesting. Honestly, I just want to know what they're doing with this new story. Like, if it does turn out that they're trying to actually make it a remake of FF7 with only little bits of changes, it'll feel a bit disappointing to me because it'll feel like they've half and halved it. It's not the remake I wanted, and it's not a new story that intrigues me and pushes the story of Final Fantasy VII forwards. I really want them to go for it one way or another. So, yeah. Anyway, let me know what you think about this interview. Let me know what you're thinking about Remake and Rebirth and the future going forwards in general down in the comments below. Probably less than a year to go till Rebirth. Absolutely wild. Anyway, don't forget, drop a like on the video, subscribe for future content, but more importantly than anything, have a great day.